It all started with a bang. Not a metaphorical one, an actual bang, loud enough to shake the already fragile walls of the house I had just bought. As I stood there, covered in dust, staring at the collapsed section of ceiling that had just given up on life, I couldn't help but wonder if I had just made the worst decision of my existence. $90,000. That's what I had paid for this abandoned wreck. A house so neglected that even raccoons seemed to have moved out due to poor living conditions. The realtor had called it a hidden gem, but standing in the middle of what looked like the set of a post-apocalyptic movie, I had a sinking feeling that the only thing hidden here was my common sense. The air smelled like mold, regret, and something disturbingly close to a dead animal. The floors creaked in a way that suggested they were planning a mutiny, and the wallpaper was peeling off as if even it didn't want to be part of this disaster. But despite all that, I had a vision. I could see past the decay, past the questionable stains, past the ominous sounds coming from the walls. I was determined to restore this house into something beautiful. What I didn't know was that my biggest problem wouldn't be the house. It would be the neighbor from hell. The first time I saw her, she was standing on her perfectly manicured lawn, watching me with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for criminals or stray dogs. Dressed in an immaculately pressed pastel blouse, her arms were crossed as she squinted at my house, her lips pressed so tightly together they nearly disappeared. I gave her a friendly wave. She did not wave back. Instead, she marched across the street with the posture of someone about to deliver a court summons. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice clipped and precise. "I'm Margaret Henderson, president of the Neighborhood Association." "Oh, one of those." I extended my hand, trying to be polite. "Nice to meet you, Margaret. I'm Jake." She did not shake my hand. Instead, she gave my house another slow, judgmental scan, like she was assessing whether it should be condemned on sight. "You do realize," she continued as if I had personally insulted her with my mere presence, "that this neighborhood has standards?" I glanced back at my house. Peeling paint. Crooked shutters. Possibly haunted. "Yeah," I said. "I figured that out when I bought the place." Margaret inhaled sharply as if my sarcasm had personally wounded her. "Well," she said, clearly regaining her composure, "I expect you to keep that in mind as you begin your renovations." She said renovations the way some people say parasite. I smiled. "Oh, don't worry, Margaret. I plan to turn this place into the nicest house on the block." She sniffed. "I'll believe it when I see it." And with that, she turned on her heel and marched back to her perfectly maintained house, leaving me standing there wondering just how bad this was going to get. Spoiler alert, it got much worse. Renovations began the very next morning. I had barely pried the first rotten floorboard loose when I noticed Margaret standing on her porch, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. By the time the first dumpster arrived, she had already sent 2 emails to the Neighborhood Association and left me a handwritten note in my mailbox. It read, "Please ensure all work follows community guidelines. HOA regulations strictly enforce aesthetic harmony." I crumpled the note and tossed it directly into the dumpster. Over the next few weeks, the passive-aggressive notes turned into outright complaints. She filed noise violations for hammering at 2 in the afternoon. She reported my trash bins for being 1 inch out of place. When I hired a crew to redo the siding, she took photos and emailed them to every resident, warning them about the degrading state of the neighborhood. But the final straw came when I found an official HOA warning taped to my front door. Notice of violation. Unauthorized exterior paint color. Please repaint with approved neighborhood tones. I had painted my house a subtle navy blue. It was classic. It was elegant. It was also, apparently, the worst offense since public indecency. Margaret had made her move. Now it was my turn. If Margaret wanted a war, I'd give her one. But I wasn't about to sink to her level. No, I was going to outplay her by the book. First, I dug into the HOA bylaws. It took a little digging, but sure enough, I found the loophole I needed. The bylaws stated that color restrictions only applied to new construction, not renovations of existing homes. My house, as a renovation, was fully exempt. Next, I started talking to the neighbors. Turns out, Margaret's reign of terror had been going on for years. She had fined one family for excessively festive Christmas lights and another for planting sunflowers that were too distracting. People were tired of her nonsense. By the end of the week, I had gathered enough signatures to call for an HOA vote on her removal. The HOA meeting was packed. Margaret sat at the front, smug as ever, as I presented my case. The navy blue house? Fully compliant. The violations she sent me? Misuse of authority. The HOA fines she'd been issuing left and right? Unlawful. I finished with one last point. I propose a vote to remove Margaret Henderson as HOA president, effective immediately. A hush fell over the room. Then, one by one, hands started going up. Margaret's face turned a shade of red that almost clashed with her pastel blouse. She stood up, sputtering, but the HOA board had spoken. By a landslide, she was voted out. Margaret moved out 2 months later. Some say she couldn't handle living in a neighborhood where she no longer ruled. Others say she was planning her next HOA takeover elsewhere. As for me, I finished my renovations. My navy blue house stood proudly on the block, a silent testament to the fact that sometimes the good guys do win. And for the first time since moving in, I could finally sit on my porch, sip my coffee, and enjoy my own neighborhood. In peace. The war was over, and I had won.